Okay, this is Eagles of Empire series, the Friedland game. I was convinced into giving this a shot. Bought a copy of it because it looked interesting. It's got this area movement for a tactical game. But there was a... Whoa, what's going wrong? Wow, my camera's dying. There was a discussion on Board Game Geek about this series and how it was particularly good at representing area movement for a tactical situation. And I wanted to take a look at it because of that. It sounded a very interesting idea. I've had a hard time with the rules. Now I understand that the first two games, Borodino and Friedland, were particularly had a different set of combat rules, and overall the rules are more dense in this than some of the later ones. On the other hand, I also understand that the later rules use a buckets of dice system, which I tend to dislike. It's just mechanically unpleasant to me. Alright, let's take a look at what these rules are like. I don't have a very high hope for this game, to tell you the truth. After having perused the rules and I think 3 times now, fiddled with some pieces on the board, and looked at the victory conditions for the scenario I'm playing, which is going to be the full day, but any of the scenarios look like they have the same issue. I'm not sure it's going to be an interesting battle, because the Russians' goal is to get off the map. That's pretty much it. Okay, let's look at the standard rules and what we're going to have here. So, and setup, etc. is a pain in the ass, plus I think I'm missing a couple of counters. So the regular sequence of play, you have... Whoa, my camera seems to have cleaned up. There was a... I don't know if it showed up for you. It may just be an artifact of the sun. The first thing is a weather determination phase. You just roll a die to see if the weather changes. In this particular scenario, that's pretty unlikely for it to be too interesting. Basically, it's either clear weather or a little windy, or maybe there'll be some rain. Then you do a reinforcements phase, and in this scenario, all the reinforcements are French. I've placed them on the turn record track. What you got over here is a kind of intriguing idea. It's a step loss game. Step losses are all replacement counters. On the back of the counters, for an optional rule, is this hidden formation. You don't know what you're facing when you're more than 2 space areas away from an enemy unit, or if you don't have a line of sight. That's kind of cool, especially since there's little dummy markers for the big formations and actually dummy leaders. So you don't know who exactly you're facing. Could be nothing at all. I don't know how much of an effect that would have on this game. Basically, I've got this one big Russian reserve, but at least at the start it looked like it would be far easier to handle things with all the units face up. So I'm gonna do that, and I may end up making... I seem to be missing 3 artillery for the French. They come in later in the game. If I can find my thin script, I'll make them. But there are also other weird things in this game. Counters that I don't think are used, like these Young Guard. I can't find any use for them in the setup instructions for any of the battles. I did find rules for the battleship Borodino, which apparently was some sort of Easter egg thrown in here as an ad for another game. But they give rules for it to come sailing down this river it couldn't fit down and out of time and shoot things up. Whatever. Okay. So then, this is not a I go, you go type of game system. What you do is you define your command situation. And that's essentially a hierarchical trace your line to up to the headquarters in general. Napoleon's kind of special. If you have Napoleon and you have Berthier over in the headquarters, you're allowed to trace to either of them. Okay. And little out of command markers will go on things they can't trace, but each leader has an opportunity to make an initiative roll. And I don't remember which numbers are which on leaders. They must say. Here we go. So the first number is a command radius, how far you can be away from units that you're commanding. Second is a tactical rating, affects combat. And the third is the initiative, which is basically a die roll that you have to make. And if you're not in command and you don't make that die roll, you get the out of command marker, and you're a little limited as to what you can do. In particular, your movement rate is reduced. You can't move adjacent to an enemy. You can't leave from being adjacent to an enemy. I don't know if there's more than that. It looks like command is going to be pretty easy to maintain on such a small map. I'm not sure what the radiuses work out as, but yeah, I don't see it as being too big a deal. Where do we have? We have Linné in command right now, and it's kind of tough. So you also have these formations ideas, and I'll get into that in a moment. In order to remain in command, let's see. Yeah, you do it for each level of the organization. So the organizational charts probably tell you who you have to run to. The rules aren't very clear on a lot of stuff. So for example, if I have, but here's the problem, because leaders can die or be replaced by the staff officers back here, and I'm not sure what function those serve except as replacements. I guess you can throw them into a combat. But let's take a look. For example, I've got Oudinot here, who's in charge of the Reserve Grenadiers. Well, what does that mean exactly? I've got the Reserve Corps. I think the Grenadiers are just these, but he's stacked on top of some reserve artillery. Can he command other reserve units? I don't know. It's not well explained within the game how these organizations actually operate and how much they really influence command and control. Or do these guys have to trace back to their commander, who would be, in this case, Linné? I don't know. Anyway, we'll try to fudge that, but I don't expect command to be too big a problem in this unless you send somebody off all the way on their own. Napoleon is a sort of special rule in this, though. Okay. Once you mark those, you come to an activations phase, and activations are alternated. Now, unlike, say, chit pull games, or a number of other systems that allow for this, well, first of all, each unit is going to get to be activated once. Each formation. Now, formations aren't well defined anywhere. The base rule book says they'll be defined in the specific rules. The specific rules don't really say what's a formation and what's not. You kind of have to guess from this chart. Now, what's not particularly not clear to me is the Reserve Corps a formation? Or can I use the Grenadiers as a formation separate from it? And if that's the case, can I combine them and say the whole Reserve Corps is moving? Or do I have to exclude the Grenadiers because they have another leader? None of this is very clear. I'm going to play it as the whole little box here is your formation. But I'm not at all sure that's the correct way to play it. You may be able to be more flexible than that, you may not. The rules aren't very specific about it again. Also, you don't just alternate or pick chits or something. what you have is these activation tables per scenario. These are going to reflect the historical initiative level at that point. And in some cases, for example, this is for scenario 4, you'll be rolling on this first activation table, and it might throw you to other activation tables. In this case, you'd go to activation table 3 if only one player's left. That's for scenario 4. I'm not going to be playing that. I'm going to be playing scenario 5, which of course is not... it covers the entire game, or the entire day, minus... So this is something else that's weird. The scenarios in this particular game, the first one is this little cav engagement over the bridge. And I tried pushing some pieces around for that, and it was incredibly boring and just didn't look like I would learn much. The next one, and that's on the previous day, that's to burn the bridge so the Russians can't make it across. The next one starts over here at 2 in the morning on the 14th, and of course the turn record track covers the day of the 14th, which is the main day of the battle. And the day of the 15th, the day after the battle when nothing happens in the game, they leave out the day of the 13th, but okay. Anyway, the first early scenario starts from like 2 in the morning, I think, till 6, or maybe a little later, I don't know. There's overlap and no easy way, no combination aspect. I can't start with that first scenario of the day and run through the whole day. I have to start somewhere between scenario 2 and scenario 3 and then play till the end of scenario 3. Okay, whatever. There are also options over here that aren't very well explained. Optional orders of battle for the Russians. And I get the feeling that I've got units on the board according to the setup, but that are referred to as part of other units that are also fully on the board. The rules have some real issues. Okay. But let's jump back to this. So how does the activation work? You make a roll and you get a choice to activate some number of forces. And it's random which player. It's based on these charts and based on the historical flow of the battle at that point. Which means you're not going to affect them by, say, taking the initiative and starting to win on the battlefield. Whatever historically happened on the battlefield is what's going to determine who has the initiative in the battle. And it's not going to reflect what the situation that you've managed to generate is. That's somewhat bothersome. Okay. And then the player simply activates their forces. Now, there are some weirdnesses here. Artillery can serve a couple of purposes. It can be standalone, in which case it can bombard. And one thing that's important is that other units in between do not block. So I could fire through this unit. I'm not sure I can fire through that, through this and this. That's not absolutely clear. Blocking terrain is supposedly, they don't really go into LOS very well, but blocking terrain is supposed to include rises. Okay? Rises are these kind of brown areas to indicate a hilltop or hilly terrain. Well, it doesn't specify whether one space of that blocks or whether it's the idea of, yeah, I can't shoot over that whole hill. Personally, I think one space of it is what should block, because anything less than that, you could be on the downslope of this hill and be totally fired at. That does not seem to make sense, but I don't know for sure. But there is some description of the French being on the reverse slope in the battle description, so we'll see where that goes. This is an interesting hole in the line. I wonder if I screwed something up. Okay. You have another option, which is you can stack the artillery on the long infantry counters. And here's so placement in the terrain is something kind of weird in this game. You can put as many little counters as you like in a hex, as far as I can see. There's a strength point limit. Now, I don't know if that applies to little counters, because somewhere it says nothing applies except the big counters. But I kind of suspect that the little counter strength point totals should count towards this. Essentially, in this game, it's 20 on most spaces. Spaces with a 2 or a 3 are 30 or 40, respectively. That's in strength points. So now, with the larger counters, you can't stack anything on them, except leaders and in this one special thing I'm going to talk about, which is artillery. But they have to fit in the space. So for example, I could not, well, maybe I could put this piece like this, but there may be places where facing disallows being in certain spaces. As an example, well, this looks like it's a bigger space. I don't know. In general, it looks like everything is the right size that I could face in just about any direction. In spaces with a 2 or a 3, you can put that many long infantry counters. And you have to position them all so that they're not overlapping one another. Alright, whatever. The special rule here is that artillery can become integrated into the infantry. And then they move and fight with the infantry and they don't bombard. You move all your forces and then you're allowed to attack adjacent things or non-adjacent things using bombardment. And again, it's important to note, your units do not block bombardment. You can fire through units. They're not line of sight impediments. Okay. So where are we? I don't know. Let's look at combat itself. Now, combat's a little weird here, and it kind of shows that infantry is the weak arm in this era. This is sort of the opposite of, say, your American Civil War era, where infantry is king. Here, infantry becomes almost useless, except to hold terrain. And I'll explain why this is. When you attack, we do have a combat results table here. There does not seem to be another copy of it except in the rules. It's not on the player aid, which means the Russian is going to have to hold the rules if he wants to see. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the artillery table. No, there's a combat table. Okay. There's a series of different combat die roll modifiers, okay? What's going to happen is both players are going to roll a die for combat. We'll get to artillery bombardment, which is pretty simple later. Both players roll a die, and then the defender's die roll is subtracted from the attacker's die roll. But the attacker has certain modifiers. So the strength of the two forces is essentially added to the die rolls. Well, the strength of the attacker minus the strength of the defender is added to the attacker's die roll. The morale. You take the unit, the morale class that is the most has the majority. Not an average or anything like that. The majority of the strength points. Flank attack adds, but attacking out of your flank gives you a penalty. Leaders can give a modifier. Cav advantage gives a modifier, but here's where it starts getting tricky. It has to get tricky, of course. The Cav advantage the Cav superiority doesn't count if the attacking force is only Cav in an attack against infantry, unless it's an opportunity charge. Basically, the infantry is able to form square if you're making an attack during your own action phase. If you make a counter charge, well, an opportunity charge, then the infantry doesn't have a chance. It's on the move. Okay. And that is a modifier from +1 to -2. Whoever has the most cavalry by strength points. So if I have one more cav than you, I get a +1 for that. Likewise, heavy cav has the same modifier. It can go up to + or -2. It's a comparison of the strength points. Same thing with lancers, but the modifier is lower. Now these parenthesized values are, I believe, for a charge, but I may be wrong, because that doesn't make sense for artillery or morale. So I'll have to look up and see what that parenthesized. If a cavalry only force... Yeah, those are just special cases that aren't further explained, so you have to look up in the rules to find them. The chart isn't going to help you there. For the cav, the heavy cav, and I think the lancers, it's on a charge. Morale, God knows. But I looked up the artillery, and that has to do with if it's only cav or something like that, you get a bonus. You can increase your bonus higher. If you've got guards on one side or the other, that can be a modifier. If units are pinned, that's a penalty. And then, of course, special units, whatever that means. In particular, I know that the engineering type units, when assaulting a town, get a bonus. Lots and lots of special modifiers, and they're not all in one place. The player aid chart doesn't give you everything. The map doesn't give you everything. The map gives you what's from the basic rules. You have to find what's in the specific rules for this scenario in the scenario book. Oddly enough, every game in this system, at least up until the next one, uses a new set of rules. Borodino used one edition of the rules. This one uses a second edition, and then they decided to can these rules and make a significant change in the whole system. Okay, keep talking. A little bit about charges. I've already kind of explained the basis of them. Modifiers change based on whether or not you're charging. Now, what is the effect of combat? Oh, and then there's counter charges, where, remember, charges are only opportunity charges. Counter charges are opportunity charges, where your enemy has an opportunity to take you out when you're trying to intervene, when you're trying to do an opportunity charge against them. Okay. Let's go to combat results. Combat results are going to be losses. You make a comparison, you get a number. The attacker has to get a fairly high positive number to do damage to the defender. So attacks are going to be probably massive engagements. Now, the result there is either retreats or combat losses. Combat losses being step losses, where you reduce... Whoa, I wonder why this guy's not on the board. General Udno, Grenadier Udno A. I guess that's these in a bigger unit. He didn't make it on the map, so... I don't know if those can recombine or not. There don't seem to be rules for it, but maybe they're for different scenarios. And I would suggest probably the guard maybe turns into other things too. They just don't bother to explain it. Okay. So, where are we? Yes. When you're attacked, when you take losses, you have the option to take step losses, which would reduce. For example, if you were this Grenadier Udno A, you could reduce it one step to become this weaker version of it. And that goes all the way down, you know, in some cases, 4 or 5 steps of counters, all taking their own counter. Now, and some of those convert to smaller counters. So the Grenadiers here turn into smaller Grenadiers, which no longer take up the same space. Neat, yeah. Okay. But the key here is you can always give up ground. Now, the Russian goal is to get off the map. I do not see them being terribly willing to take losses standing and holding, except here's the thing. If an attack is successful with cav, the cav may pursue. How big a deal is that? Well, there's lots of buku bonuses for pursuing. In particular, I don't remember what they are. Defenders are at half. Cav superiority is increased. That may be it, not charge. Retreating units get a penalty to morale differential. But yeah, they're still able to keep retreating. And that's kind of the problem. I'm not really sure. There's no real penalty to retreating in terms of you're giving up ground. And the Russians' goal is get off the map. They may need to hold a little bit. I'll come back in a moment because I'm running out of video. Okay, so with the main effects of combat appearing to be likely to be retreats, there really aren't a lot of restrictions on this. There's some terrain that can cause you to be stuck in a position where you can't retreat. There is one little danger. You can't move up a slope, and we gotta kind of look here because things are, yeah, that's slopes. You can't move up or down a slope with artillery as a basic terrain tenet, unless there's a road. And if you're withdrawing in a retreat, you just can't cross that. So you'd be abandoning your guns. The attacker could advance into that area. So that might be another reason you want to not give up ground. Of course, there's also I'm in good ground, and I want to keep that good ground. That doesn't look like it's going to be a terribly important factor for the Russians here, but we'll see. To me, the Russian goal right now is get the Russian units on the other side of the river. That's going to be the whole game. That's what it's all about. Now, it makes no sense because that's not what the battle was about. The battle was about the Russians trying to crush the French up here. But the victory conditions are pretty clear. Okay. A lot of how to handle the terrain in this. Special terrains. Special rules for night and hidden units as well as the option. Which I think is kind of a cool option, but I probably don't want to deal with it. Okay. Now, this is a nightmare of this game. Things are distinguished by little numerical notes, and they're not terribly easy to find. So for example, for setup, once you kind of start seeing that there's a front line, it's pretty easy to set up the stuff along there, but the other stuff you're told by a number, hey, it's 121. And okay, that's near 122, but it's not always. Sometimes one's kind of off somewhere you don't expect it. And then the errata is handled in the same way, and some of it doesn't appear to be. So for example, this doesn't appear to tell you anything that's not already on the board. It's really a clarification. Other stuff on here makes as little sense as the rules do. For example, the optional setups. They say optional setup C is scenario 3. A and B are for scenario 4. Huh? What's the main setup? What's going on here? I don't know. I just don't know. I'm playing the one I've got. I've got my best guess at what it's supposed to be. I'm missing some counters. I looked at the counter sheet, and the 3 artillery that I'm missing over here, I do not have. I have stuff that's not set up, but I can seem to understand, hey, this is some other unit maybe. I'm not sure what some of this other stuff is, and they put in a damn battleship. Okay. Special rules on some of these things. The rivers, they're pretty much impassable. Each one has its own rules as to if you build pontoons across it, though. There's only 2, but still. Special rules for specific areas by number without necessarily a huge terrain note, but once you look you see, okay, these are all around facing areas, which is kind of weird. I think that's what that little thing means. That's what this says, but this only allows 1 unit, the others allow 3. We got these little fords, which Russian cav can go look for to try to help find a way across the river. What else do we have? Well, there's a bridge which can be bombarded into being destroyed. There's the ability to build pontoon bridges. I'm not sure why there's different symbols for the different pontoon bridges. That's not really covered. This one looks like, hey, maybe it's one that has little cliffs so that it fits in better with the terrain view. Why does one have two bridges? And I had a hard time distinguishing this bridge, which is the main bridge, in part because there's two copies of it. They don't look all that different. Okay. So anyway, you have these pontooners, pioneers, and sappers, and they do different things. The pontooners can, of course, lay down pontoon bridges. I think the sappers also lay down pontoon bridges. They're the French equivalent, but I'm not sure. And pioneers do something. Are they the ones who can destroy bridges? I don't know. These guys each have their own little special rule buried into other things. However, they all give a bonus when attacking a town or village, which is kind of cool. It's possible that bombardment into this town and some other town somewhere. That one's Friedland, I can recognize that. The other one is the village of Heinrichsdorf, 035. Well, I think I'll have an easier time finding Heinrichsdorf than that's up here, than I will by the number. And that's one of the problems. It's not like a hex map. It's not easily discernible what's where. These things can burst into flames if there's artillery fire into them. And that can cause real problems. They provide a defensive bonus. Well, Heinrichsdorf doesn't, but Friedland does. It provides a defensive bonus, +2 to morale, defender strength times 1.5, penalty to artillery bombardment, and no cav bonus for attacking the town. Well, that's great, but if artillery fires into it, it has a chance of setting it on fire, and that can start, over time, it can turn into a big enough blaze that it starts killing the men in the town. You have this option, this counter here, which allows you to fight the fire with infantry. Then you have this counter, which tells you, I don't know what, there's monuments in flaming woods or something. That is not explained in the game. Everything else, I think, is more or less, except for the distinguishment of the rivers. But they did manage to explain how to use the battleship in this game. What else? We already talked a little bit about weather before. The guard. So, guard units have a little, in general, have a little plume on their counter, which indicates they get a little bonus in the combat system. But they also, the French guard has some special rules. In which case they can be committed, they can become the morale for the attack they're making. They don't have to take the losses if they're the morale, as long as losses are 1 or less. They can stack the Guard Grenadier and Chasseur Long Infantry, which aren't on the board yet. That's going to be these two units. They can stack together as an individual long infantry, if you wish, or not. You can split them up if you would rather. If they stack together and they take a step loss, each unit does not take a step loss, only one of the units does. The French have the ability to create grand batteries. There's an advantage to heavy artillery. Basically, artillery rules are kind of, I don't know, a little wonky in this. You end up ranges depend on what you have. Well, grand battery can increase the range. Modifiers depend on the type of artillery, etc. But it's not all very clear on here. I think the black dots are the heavies. I'm not sure. They get some advantages I didn't even go into the artillery bombardment. How about that? I skipped over it because it seemed pretty simple. But it really, like anything in this game, it's not absolutely trivial. So, you got modifiers based on the stacking limit of the area and how much troops are in it. That kind of makes sense, but it sounds annoying to calculate. Heavies give a bonus, terrain gives penalties. But then you compare the range to the type of artillery, and horse and non-horse are different. Horse artillery can only fire at range 1. Non-horse is halved at range 2. Heavy units are halved at range 3. Well, in a sense, creating a grand battery with non-heavy artillery turns it into heavies. I'm not sure that's entirely what happens. The combined artillery strength is doubled at a range of 1, so it's actually better than a heavy artillery. At a range of 2, it's normal. At a range of 3, it'll be halved. So this is actually a little better than the heavies are. Special rules for French Grenadiers, what's that? They have a bonus to defending in their morale. French infantry in the woods. French infantry don't take a penalty to their morale when fighting in the woods. Special Russian guards. What is theirs? Yeah, this is the unit. I don't know where it is. There's some unit, and I think it's this one, that looks like it converts into guard units that I already have deployed on the field, and I'm really disturbed by this, but maybe I'm mistaken. Is it this 1st Division Malaton? Yeah, that's what I think it is, and it seems to be deployed twice. I'm just following, I mean, I'm not following that. I'm following, and that seems to largely be the same, I'm following the actual, per unit description of where everything gets set up. And then there's this rule that seems to indicate that the setup is illegal. But other than that, I don't think it says a damn thing. It's talking about these setup options, but not how they work. And then there's optional French reinforcements. They bring in this heavy cav and say, oh, well, there's been some confusion in the history that this might have been there, but it's pretty clear that it's not. So we threw it in anyway, like, I don't know, it's a little more reasonable than throwing in a battleship. Yeah. Okay. Then we got special rules for all of the different leaders. Seriously. I mean, Napoleon has his special rules, great. Berthier has his special rules. You have artillery generals who have special rules. Some of the leaders have split tactical ratings. Ney is split between attack and defense. Grucci, his is if he has cav only or a mixed force. He's split by different things. These aren't even the same. They're just, we wanted to give this special rule to this leader and this special rule to that. I don't know. It's an annoying little way to handle things. I don't know how big a difference it makes to the game, to the battle as a whole. Headquarters, how far they could be traced to. Well, it depends on whether the leaders are present. And Napoleon and Berthier at the same place is a 7-area range. They can reach most of the battlefield. Then we have the different scenarios, and like I said, there's this cav action scenario. There's almost nothing on the board, and it really comes down to, can the French burn the bridge before the Russians get to it or something? I don't know. I played one turn of it and said, I can't do this. This is stupid. I was thinking about doing the Marshal Lanné's holding action, which starts a little before this full day battle. I kind of wish the game started with that. I like when games start out with where the real fighting kind of starts. Instead, here we have, it's already set up for a little later. Then we go to a scenario called Historical Friedland, which jumps us way ahead to, what, 4 p.m.? somewhere around here when most of the pieces are on the map. Why this is called historical? Well, because it gives you sort of the big point of the battle, the big push at the end of the battle. When the scenario that I'm playing, the Russians can just turn and run probably. I'm not sure. Scenario 4, Friedland, it didn't have to be that bad. I don't know what changes here. This is the same time. It may be a slightly different setup, and it's using an alternative order of battle for the last one, but it's essentially the same scenario, although it may have different victory conditions. And then we go to the one that I'm playing, supposedly the full day. You'd think you'd getting the full shebang here, but there are two scenarios that run at least partially outside of this one. One of them, that little cav thing, you know, I'm fine throwing that out. That doesn't really need to be there. Now, for the victory conditions for this, and this is just to show you how wonderfully written these rules are in terms of organizational. What they do, first of all, there's these weird little, okay, we need extended formations for the French to cover this special situation, so we use the dummy counters for that. That's fine, but it refers you back to the rules from the other thing and then says, oh, but they're not entirely the same because of this. Likewise, special rules to handle a lack of French headquarters, special command rules. All this goes away when you play just the main battle. And it changes at various times in this scenario. But let's find our victory conditions somewhere. French decisive. Okay, so victory conditions, they tell you, hey, go look at scenario 4 for the victory conditions. Okay, no, wait. Oh, Jesus. No, that's the restriction on the French Guard. There's just all these cases in here where they're saying, go look at this, go look at that. I can't even find the victory conditions. I'm looking under victory conditions, but they don't say. When calculating Russian losses for purposes, yeah. Okay, here we go. French decisive, marginal, poor, humiliating, as in scenario 3. So I go back to scenario 3 for this, except some differences. And then, effects of French casualties. If the French lose steps, the French performance is increased by 1. Now, let's take a look over at scenario 3. I have no easy way to find all the scenario victory conditions. I'd have to recompile them onto my own sheet of paper to be able to look at the scenario conditions. So, that's why I'm kind of not as sure about what we've got. When we run over here, well, a French humiliating performance would be 9 or fewer steps of Russian infantry killed. If the French have committed the guard, then 13 or fewer. So, essentially, I can get what I'd say is a marginal victory with the Russians because I get a step back by not engaging, by not fighting the battle. Alternatively, though, I could be going for that full-on humiliation, in which case I have to cause 9 steps of infantry casualties. Well, we'll see. Seriously. And if you cause enough French infantry casualties, you end up getting more... You can end up getting shifts in your favor as the Russians. And indeed, the Russian gets double credit for eliminating French long infantry during 6 to 1300. The early part of the game, I get double for killing steps of the big units. Now, I don't know, and I'm going to have to flip back and forth to get any idea about this, but I don't know, hey, what is it that counts again? I don't remember. Is it only longs? Is it shorts? And it's a fucking annoying way to set up your rule book. But that's like that throughout this entire rule book. It's not that complicated looking a game, but the rules are written by someone with no sense of organization at all. It looks like they are, but it's just this jumbled crap. And I'm not going to touch anything else by them because of that. I don't want to learn another system after it when someone shows this much trouble. Just not distinguished well. Alright, let's see. A Russian cav is a third of an infantry and artillery is a half of an infantry. I'm assuming that small infantry steps are full steps for this. It's just the longs are doubled for the French under certain circumstances. Alright, we're going to give this a try. I can't give you a guarantee I'm going to play through this whole thing. If it turns out looking like the Russians are just able to disengage, more power to them. Let's go.